Why I invest in expensive markets versus cheap markets, and how come I think it's better than doing it in the cheap markets. So if you are interested in investing in real estate in expensive markets and how to do it and why I do it, this is the video to watch. This is the podcast to listen to. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Greg Helbeck. I've been a full-time real estate house flipper, landlord, and wholesaler for the last 10 years. I've done almost 400 completed transactions, and the point of this video or any podcast I put out is to share with you the truth on this business, what works, what doesn't work. So anything you're going to hear from me is going to be from the trenches, from the real world. This is not regurgitated theory out of a book, and today's topic is why I invest in expensive markets and why you should too. So if you get value from this video or this podcast, depending on how you're consuming this, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're really feeling crazy, put it on social media, repost it, and it would mean a lot to me. So why do I invest in expensive markets? Well, first thing, I grew up in an expensive market. So I grew up in the New York City suburbs in the Hudson Valley. That is an expensive area, right? You're 45 minutes north of Manhattan. Houses there are always expensive, right? You're in proximity to the biggest city in the country. So I didn't know any better, right? When I got into this business 10 years ago, that's where I was living. That was my backyard. So that's what I had to get used to. So because I'm from there, I had to start investing there because I wanted to stay local. I didn't want to go virtual when I was brand new. So that's the first reason. If you're in a market and it's expensive and that's where you live, let's say it's New York, Seattle, Miami, San Diego, LA. If you're in an area like that, you can invest in that market. It's not as bad as people think. And I'll get into a good point in a minute on why it doesn't matter where you are. And if you're in an expensive area, it's going to be better. So that's thing number one. If you're in that market, you might as well stay there. And then I actually moved out of New York after doing the business for 3 or 4 years, and I moved to San Diego, which is one of the most expensive markets, and I invested in real estate there. And now I live in Seattle, and that is an expensive market. And guess what? You probably guessed it right. I invest there. So I like expensive markets. I've never lived in an area that was cheap. I've done deals in cheap markets on a one-off basis, and I got to tell you that it's not as cool as people think. So here's my main point and lesson number one. The process of buying real estate, whether you're buying a house for 500 grand or 50 grand, is the same thing. It's the same thing. You have to sign the same contract. You got to get the same title insurance policy. You have to get the same transaction steps done. It's the same thing, except the zeros are bigger if it's 500 versus 50. So it's going to be the same process, right? You can invest in the Hudson Valley where houses are $500 to $1 million, or you can invest in Rochester or Buffalo where they're like 200,000, and it's the same process. You have to get the lawyer involved. You got to do the same shit. If you're in Washington State, $1 million purchases, right? If you're in the middle of nowhere, Washington State, it's going to be a $100,000 purchase. It's the same process, but the dollars are bigger and the profits can be bigger. So my theory is that if you're going to do the same exact process and go through the work that's required to do deals, you might as well do it where you can make a bunch of money, right? So number one is the process is the same, whether you're in an expensive market or a cheap market. Now, it's not as easy to get a deal in an expensive market because the sellers are more sophisticated and they know that their houses are worth more money, but the profits are bigger, which takes me to lesson number two. The margins are just bigger because the purchase prices are bigger, right? The average wholesale deal in New York and Seattle is like 30 to 50 grand because we're buying houses in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. So ultimately, you're going to be able to create a bigger margin if you're assigning, if you're in an area where the purchase prices are higher. Now, also, when you're flipping properties and you're in New York or Seattle or San Diego, you're just going to make more money because if you're a flipper and you're trying to make a percentage of the sales price, if the sales price is higher, your margin is going to be higher, right? So if you're selling a house in, Snohomish County, Washington, which is up near Everett, the median price up there is like $550,000, $650,000, right? So to make $55,000 or $60,000 in net income on a flip is not unreasonable, and it's very doable because that's what the houses are going for. And now if you're in a cheap area where the median price is $200,000 and you want to make 10%, you're going to make $20,000. And it's the same process. You got to fix the house. You got to get a contractor. You got to get a realtor. You got to take it to title and escrow twice. It's the same thing. So if you're in a more expensive market, you're just going to make bigger margins because you are dealing with a more expensive house. That's just simple as that. And now the process and the strategy behind getting a discount in real estate doesn't change no matter the market, right? If you need to buy a house in Seattle at 75% of market value minus repairs, right? 75% of 550,000 is a bigger spread than 75% of a house worth 150,000 minus repairs. So you're following the same formula. You're just using a more expensive price to go off of based on the local market. So number one, the process is the same. Number two, it's easier to make bigger profits. And number three, once you invest in an expensive market, if you ever want to go into a cheaper market, it's like playing in the major leagues and then going back down to the minors. So it'll give you a huge advantage if you ever want to go cheap. I'll give you one more example. I remember a couple of years ago, I wanted to test out some direct mail in like a small city in Pennsylvania. And I dropped like $2,000 or $3,000 on direct mail, and I picked up 1 or 2 deals off that, which is crazy because it's usually like quadruple the price. And I bought a property for $15,000 cash, and I closed on it because the closing costs were like $5, and I resold it for $30,000, and I made 15 grand, which is better than a sharp stick in the eye. But I realized this doesn't really make any sense, right? Obviously, like, I just bought something for 50% of what it was worth and resold it for full market value, but I still had to go through title and escrow twice. I had to go through that to purchase. I had to go through that to sell. I had to pay closing costs twice. I had to, deal with the transaction. And I'm like, well, I'd rather just do this in a market that I'm familiar with. It's expensive, like New York or at the time, San Diego, because we can make bigger margins. All right. And then the last thing I'll leave you here before I wrap this video up is that if your goal is to do 6-figure spreads consistently, like we do at Velocity House Buyers, you need to be in a market, for the most part, that has a median sales price of above 400 grand, if not higher, right? Because to make $100,000 net on a deal, and you're in a market that the median sales price is $250,000, you practically have to get the house for nothing in order to try to make 100 grand, assuming it needs work. But if you're dealing with properties like I do all the time, where like they're worth in between $500,000 and $800,000, for you to make 100 grand on a couple deals a year isn't that unreasonable because there's so much equity at play because of the value of the property. So if you want to do big, fat 6-figure deals, you want to be in an area where the median is at least 400 to 450,000, preferably higher, 550, 650, 750, because it's easier to make big spreads. My best ever deal I did was a $350,000 net profit. That's after all expenses. And that was in San Diego in a very expensive market. So I hope you got value from this. Hopefully this inspired you to stay in an expensive market if you're already in one. Or if you're not in one, hey, maybe you try it out. Give it a go, right? It's a great time, I'm telling you. Once you can play in the majors, it's a lot easier to operate the real estate game. And if you are watching this or listening to this and you have a house you want to sell me, whether you're a wholesaler or you are a actual seller or you know a seller, send me an email, greg@velocityhousebuyers.com, or send me a DM on Instagram @grego37. I'll see you on the next REI Weekly Lesson. Take care.